Alright, welcome back ladies and gentlemen to the Chupacabra tutorials channel. I'm your host Larry, and today we're back for another Photoshop tutorial looking at how to create a topographical map effect that is used for literally making topographical maps, making layered sort of paper or plastic or metallic effects, anything you can think of that might require you to have like this almost layered slices effect. This would be something that you could use that for. And I'm going to show you basically today how to recreate the picture that I've got here in the background. So the first thing we're going to need to do is get a new document. And to do that, we're going to go up to File, New, or you can hit Control N and bring up the new document panel. And from here, we're going to set up a couple of different things. So once that's open, bring it over here, and what we want to do is we want to create a 1920 by 1080 size canvas or little image box, and we want that to be transparent background. 72 pixels per inch is more than enough, and we'll go ahead and select create. And so to begin with, we don't really have anything, so we're going to fill this workspace with the fill tool by hitting Shift F5. And we're going to take the foreground color. And if you look over here, if I click on the color picker window, for the foreground color, I'm just kind of picking a light baby blue and hitting OK. And then I'll hit Shift F5 and I'll select the foreground color because the color in the front, the topmost box of the color picker is the foreground, and the one behind it is the background. So fore meaning front and back meaning, well, back. And then we'll just hit OK, and that will fill the entire square with some color. Then we'll make another layer by hitting this little plus icon at the bottom of the layers panel. And from here, we'll probably want to draw a couple of little shapes. Let me grab my drawing tablet here. Make sure that's set to brush size. So there's really not a crazy idea behind this. I'm just going to take my color. I'm going to nudge it to like a darker blue to start me out. I'm just going to kind of like go up one increment at a time to different colors for this. I want to make sure we've got a semi-hard brush. We'll just put a little bit of softness on the edge of it so it doesn't look quite so janky. And with this tool, I'm going to go ahead and draw some terrain. You can draw whatever you want in whatever configuration you want, but I like to start kind of in the middle, and I like to make kind of like a wavy ridge pattern. And then that'll give me room to put stuff in the corners if I want to, or anywhere else that floats my boat. And I'll just kind of fill that in. Really, part of the fun of exploring new techniques is just dinking around, creating stuff, drawing stuff, and having fun because, well, if you don't enjoy making silly pictures in Photoshop, what are you really doing with Photoshop on your computer? And then we'll create some little hills that are kind of off to the sides. We'll make this an asymmetrical painting, kind of like we had before with the other document. Maybe we'll extend this one down a little bit more at the bottom, just so it looks kind of interesting when we draw future layers. Now, the problem I'm sure you've noticed is, unlike this other one that we've been working with, I got some shadows going on here at the edges. I've got some kind of like a light pattern here at the tops. There's some different things going on here that give it more of a well-rounded 3D effect. So let's explore that. So the way that I'm going to work on that today is, instead of using like the filters menu up here or any of that stuff, I'm actually going to just double click on the layer, and we're going to do most of the heavy lifting here with the layer styles menu. So here we can go down, and the first thing we want to do is we want to add a drop shadow. And what the drop shadow is going to do is it's going to make it look like this is just a big flat disk of material that is hovering above a bigger piece of paper or like a countertop or cardboard, whatever. And you can see that this is an object because it's leaving a shadow in three-dimensional space. So from here, we've got a few different options we can play with. How opaque and how transparent is that shadow? Is it bold and dark? Or do we want it to be a little bit more subtle, like a soft shadow on like a cloudy day? And then from there, we can even drag it around. You know, do we want to make it look like the light's coming from the left side of the screen? Do we want it to look from the right? Or do we want to say like, oh, this is actually kind of more like a satellite topographical image where the light is coming straight down from a satellite view? So I think I like it with like a little bit of like 68, 72-ish for the amount of opacity. The angle is 61 degrees. And then we can set how far away it looks from the object. So it looks like there's a big bright light right above it or something. I think right around 14 looks good. And then the size of it, we want it to kind of nestle just underneath the rim here. There we go, that looks good. Maybe I'll even bump up the opacity to be a little bit darker. There we go. And then spread, that just means where it blends into the edge. So that if you put the spread up to 100%, it's a hard line. If you put it at 0, it's a soft, kind of gentle gradient from dark shadow to nothing. And then down here, you can anti-alias it if you want, which gives it more of like a hardened edge to it, that you can use different patterns to create different kind of light effects. Add noise to it if you want, which kind of just looks like static. But that looks good. I like these settings. I might just increase the size just a smidge. And then the other thing that I like to do that I've been playing with is a lot of people use this effect to create a layered paper effect. I saw this a lot back when Android was using it as like their default stock wallpaper, was just a bunch of layered slices that all had shading on them. So let's do a little inner glow, or an inner shadow. Yeah, I like the inner glow. So for the inner glow, we want like a white color, because that'll blend with basically everything. And then we can set it to like normal, or multiply would make it look kind of dark, but screen looks good. I like screen. And then we don't need this to be especially big, just a little bit on the edge. So it looks like the edges of this object are kind of wearing away from the elements and from the light, all that stuff shining on it. And then we want it to be fairly opaque. Or not fairly opaque, fairly transparent. So we're going to set the opacity like to 20. And that looks good. Yeah, it kind of creates like an inner light shadow effect. And actually, before I close the layer style, you can do things like add an inner shadow. Usually if you add an inner shadow, though, it looks like it's an object that has a hole in it. So say you wanted to make a light plug, you draw the different holes for the plug, for the actual electrical socket, and then you'd add an inner shadow so it looks like it falls deep down. Each of the holes has like some depth to it falling into the device where you would plug it into the wall. But in this case, we might play with some Bevel and Emboss. And what this is going to do is, if you look here on the edges of the object, it's giving it almost like a rounded feel. Like it's either a rounded, smoothed edged tabletop, which goes from like a hard edge smoothly, gradually up to the top surface, rounded tabletop. And to a certain degree, if you play around with it, you can get it so that it looks like it's kind of got some peeling edges that are kind of flopping up at the edges, depending on what you'll like for your effects. This one's kind of fun, but I don't need a lot of it. Yeah, so there you go. It looks like there's a tapered edge on it, like a rounded tabletop for kids that's made out of plastic. But I don't need it that intense. I'm just going to set it at like a 32%. And then down here, in these other effects, you've got the highlights. How bright are the highlights? I don't need those particularly bright. And then the shadow, let's make that kind of dark, but kind of not, just so we can tell that it's there. And this is one of those things where different effects in Photoshop are as complicated as just play with the sliders. Do you like it? No, throw it away. Or, you know, do you like this combination? No, try a different combination. It's just a matter of visually fiddling with things until something looks interesting. Now, you can certainly, with a certain amount of time and practice, figure out your own system for this that makes it look interesting based upon your own style, like, oh, I know this effect looks good with this, you can certainly do that. But always be willing to play around with your design. That way, you can always create something fun. So the next thing we want to do is, obviously, one layer doesn't make it. So I'm going to select the layer with our blue landmass in it and hit Control J. From here, I'm actually going to select all with Control A. I'm going to delete that layer, and then I'm going to select a new color with my brush selected. So I'm going to click the blue, and I'm going to nudge up to like a dark purple. So you can tell it's a different color, but you can definitely tell that it's a different layer because of that color. And then because it's still got all of our settings on it that we set up for the layer underneath of it, it'll retain that as we draw. Now, I apologize, this methodology might not be the best idea for slower, older computers, because Photoshop, I know, runs on stuff that can be kind of ancient, but not well. And not everybody who learns how to use things like Photoshop has got the budget for a new computer that often. But do what you can. You can, obviously, if you look over here in the layer panel, you see how there's these eyeballs. If you click on the one for effects, it'll temporarily disable it. Then you can go through here and you can draw stuff on the page. And then when you're done, you can re-hit this little eyeball that's disappeared, and it should turn everything back on. So that way you can make your changes, preview what they look like, say, oh, I don't really like that, and then go to something else the next round. And one of the great things about Photoshop is you can basically set it up to remember the history over here in this panel of everything you've done since you opened the document. And you can undo back to, like, oh, what if I want to go all the way back to when I had this brush tool selected? Then you can go all the way back forward in time, so that no matter where you may have made a mistake, you can always go back and fix it. You can even set those settings up so that it saves all of those changes with the file and they're never lost since the dawn of time. That one's a little bit more than I feel I need. If I did that, I'd probably just start the document over, but you know, it's just an option in case you want it. It's a great learning tool as well. Being able to say, like, oh, I screwed this up here, but now I know, and you're not screwed out of, you know, finishing a project for a deadline, you can easily go back and tweak that. So what we're going to do for a lot of the rest of this tutorial is we're just going to be looking at drawing different designs and different shapes for each one of these. So I'm going to make a couple extra copies of an empty layer just in case we need them. And I'm going to just start drawing random stuff for our terrain. So we're going to go up to like almost like a purpley pink for the next layer up. Layer number 3. And we don't have to make every one of these objects have all of the layers like I did in my example. I just wanted my example to be really colorful, really bright, and immediately upon seeing it, tell you exactly what you were getting into with this tutorial. So you can make it so that the only thing that's really tall in this image is this big ridge-like structure in the center that I'm drawing. On a map, this might be like a mountain ridge or something. And everything else can stop here at the pink layer. Alternatively, maybe that's the low point and everything else is tall around it. It's completely up to you. You're the author. Make your art at home something neat and unique, because you should always try to customize every tutorial that you see and experience. That's a good way to play with the tools I'm talking about, or another tutorial guy's talking about. Guy or girl, I should say. There's plenty of really good ones out there from our female compatriots. So we'll just draw over here. I'm trying to make this look not like somebody's just smearing around different colors of bubblegum, but it's kind of looking like that. And then for our last layer, let's just do a little bit approaching kind of like a rose red color. So the rose red is only going to be here in the middle, like I was talking about before. Because this is a tall ridge, but it's not a completely uniform ridge. Like the hills around it do not come up to its level, and it's a little wonky, so one side's definitely bigger than the other. And then from here we could do things like hit the eraser tool and clean up some of our more jagged edges so that they don't stick around if we don't want them to. And you can even enable some smoothing effects on your brushes if you know how to do that. That we'll talk about in a different tutorial. And then just like that, we have a topographical map of sorts that starts at the top of hills and a mountain ridge, and it goes down to the low spot, the little field, or maybe it's a river, depending on what you like to do. And if you want to, you can even double click on that base layer, and you can go down to pattern overlay. And inside the pattern overlay, there's a bunch of freebies that come with Photoshop. So you could select water, and then we can make the scale of that just small enough that you can actually make out that it's supposed to be water. So that there's actually like that swirly liquid feel, like just like that. See? Kind of looks like there's water in there. And then if we wanted to, we could add some detail to these other layers. So if we go into here and say pattern overlay, we have things like this weird box. It's kind of just a repeating series of squares. And that can be kind of fun. It almost looks like a quilt. You can add this spongy material that I think is actually supposed to be sponge. There's tree, and down here at the water, just because I saw a lot of people were using this tutorial to make layered paper inside of things like logos and other text, I've actually made a paper texture. And if you want to make your own paper texture, you just go to File, New, and create like a something square, like a 400 by 400 box. And then inside of here, fill it with Shift F5. Just 50% gray will work. And then go to Filter, go to Noise, and then Add Noise. And this is going to add what looks like static. And what we need the static for is we need alternating colors in order for one of these filters to be able to grab onto that texture and turn it into something like this. So this is cross-hatching. You can also do angled strokes or accented edges or whatever. And from here, you can use some of these basic brush filters to create some kind of interesting different textures that, when you apply them to a flat surface, look like different varieties of paper. Me personally, I kind of like the cross-hatch with some kind of level 15 stroke length, and then for sharpness, I like it kind of softer. So I'm not going to put the sharpness past 3. And then the strength can kind of wipe out what looks like a natural kind of machine process texture. I know that's kind of a counterintuitive statement, but it's kind of true. And from here, we'll just go to Edit, and then we will define pattern. And you can name this whatever you want, and it'll appear inside of your pattern menu. So here I can go to the different layers, and I can go, give me the pattern overlay, and down at the bottom I should have the two that I've got. This is the crosshatch paper. This is just the regular paper, so let's grab the crosshatch. And you can, if we zoom in real quick, you can see that there's that texture, and we can change its detail to be really zoomed in or really small, and we can alternate that and alternate the angle so it looks like different pieces of paper and doesn't quite line up, and we can do that to every last one of our different layers. Now, it's often nice once you've got this sort of delineated, we can actually just find that pattern right here in the list of effects added to this layer, and we can right click it and we can say, go ahead and copy that layer style and then paste it on the layer above. So now it's got the same thing, but it's got that same direction, and we want it to kind of look unique. So we'll just double click it and we'll change the angle of the texture. And just again right here, we'll paste that same effect on this layer and then on the top layer. And so just like that, we now have what looks like layered pieces of almost kind of like cloth or paper on top of some sort of pattern material that's supposed to represent water. And this you could almost turn in like it was a piece of cardboard diorama for, you know, a school assignment. And this has a number of different applications. You can put this inside of text so that it looks like there's a landscape inside of your logo. You can put this inside of a shape. You can leave this as across the entire background, and it can just be a fun background that you make. It could literally represent an actual map. You could trace a map yourself and make your own little sort of faux topographical map of an area. Whatever you want to do, it's all just about how these things layer together to create a neat effect. So I hope you found that helpful. If you guys and gals at home have any questions on how any of this works, feel free to hit me up. I'm always happy to answer questions if possible. And I hope this has been useful and fun, and I'll catch you next time. Bye, everybody, and have a good one. There will be more Photoshop tutorials on the way for the channel pretty soon.